Hello everyone, and welcome back to A Couple Books. This is Couple as per usual. Now today we passed 300 subscribers, or a few days ago, but that means that we should celebrate. We should do something fun. So today we are going to be doing my top 10 books of all time. This is a video I haven't done. I haven't done one in a year, so there's been a lot of new books that I've read that have been added to this and have replaced other books, and these are my top 10 books of all time. These are my favorite ones. It crosses many genres. We have sci-fi, we have fantasy, we've got horror. So there's something for everyone in this listing right here, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm just going to go through. They're in no particular order, so let's just get started. Why don't we? The first book we're going to talk about today is actually a horror book, and that is going to be Hex by Thomas Oldwell. This is a newer addition to my top 10 list. This one I particularly love because, oh my god, it is so freaky. For those who do not know, I read this one like about a year ago, and it's basically about a small town where there's a witch, and she's been alive for longer than she should have been, and her mouth is sewn shut, as was done to her a few generations ago, and she just wanders aimlessly through this town. And anyone who moves to this town has to keep this a secret. Even though that they're living there, and even though that they're residing there, and they can see the witch and are interacting with the witch, they can't tell the outside world about it. And these people are sort of stuck there due to some type of curse. And we basically just follow the residents of this town as they deal with the fact that there's a witch living amongst them, and she's creepy AF. And this one freaked me out. It's really messed up. There's a lot of triggers in this book, so do not read it lightly, but it is definitely one of my all-time favorite horror books for giving me a really good jump scare. My next one for you guys is going to be Stuart Turton's The Devil in the Dark Water. This is, I believe, one of the newest additions to this list. I've already talked about it on this channel, but it's all about a group of people who are taking a voyage and are traveling from one point of Europe to another point. There's a lot of different moving parts within the story. This story just revolves around the crew dealing with the fact that there's something off on their voyage. There's something weird going on. Is it demons? Is it the Satan? Is it people playing games? Is it all a ploy? Is it a charade? And we don't know. But the atmosphere in it and the complexities are so woven together so seamlessly, it's difficult to describe what this book's even about outside of a possibly haunted voyage, but it's just so well done. And Stuart Turton has become one of my favorite authors because of this book, because of how he was able to give the vibes and the atmosphere that just really delivered this book as being a really chilling atmospheric read for those who are into nautical voyages and into horror. Next, I have a sci-fi book. This was actually the first Blake Crouch book I ever read, and for those who are not aware, Blake Crouch writes horror and sci-fi primarily. This is my favorite book by him. And this one is a story about a man named Jason Desson, as he basically deals with the fact that he's woken up and he is not living his life. Like, his name is the same name, everything is somewhat similar, but it's not his life. And he doesn't really know what's going on, it doesn't really make any sense, and he's trying to figure out what has happened and how he ended up in the body of a man named Jason Desson, who is obviously him, but this is not his life. And it's got a lot of moving parts, but the reason I really love this book is because it has heart. It talks about how we as people make different choices and how that can lead to such drastically different lives. Blake Crouch is able to analyze that very philosophical question while painting a very fun and energetic science fiction adventure story. So I love this one. Next, we have Crooked House by Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is, of course, a classic. I'm currently and still trying to read all of her books, but this is one of the first ones I read about her, and this one really made me fall in love with the closed circuit mystery subgenre, where there's a group of people, and one of them had to commit the murder because they're in a locked room or some situation like that, and we need to figure out who they are. I love closed circuit mysteries, I love locked room mysteries, and it's all because of Agatha Christie, but I do think that Crooked House is by far her most superior work that I have read to date. Out of the 10 or so books that I've read of hers, this is my number one and will probably forevermore be. It is just about this family who lives in this one gigantic mansion. They're all there, all the way from the grandfather all the way down to the children, and they all live together. And when the patriarch of the family, the grandfather, dies, it is up in the air who caused the murder. And it was just such a great story, and Agatha Christie expertly wove together all the plot points and really led you to a very satisfying conclusion where you're like, oh, duh, that was obviously it. I didn't get it. It was fantastic. I loved it, and it's really opened my eyes to the entire locked room, closed circuit mystery subgenre that there is in her mystery books, and I love her for this. Next is going to be a no surprise pick for y'all, but that's going to be Jim Butcher's Changes, which I think is book 11. It's somewhere in the middle of the Dresden Files, which follows Harry Dresden, a Chicago wizard who's in the Yellow Pages, as he basically deals with the various threats that come to his city, as he works alongside police and supernatural forces to basically maintain some semblance of order within the chaotic supernatural community. And this one is the book in which everything changed for Dresden Files. I love Dresden Files. It's my most favorite series of all time. Probably, maybe. It changes. But this one in particular is the one in which Harry Dresden went from just your average everyday wizard to something more. And this is when the world that Jim Butcher wrote in the Dresden Files went from just a typical urban fantasy detective story to something more. This is when it went to grand fantasy and epic fantasy proportions, in my opinion. And I love this book for that. It's got heart. It's got a lot of emotion in it. It's got a lot of plot twists. It's just got everything that you really want in a book. Jim Butcher delivered it excellently in this one. I can't say much because it is in the middle of the series and I cannot spoil it because huge spoilers in this book, but it's excellent. Alright, my next one is The Age of War by Michael J. Sullivan. This is book 3 in the Legends of the First Empire. I did an entire series review a few weeks ago, so be sure to check that out. But this one in particular, I love it because for those who are not aware, this was the one that Michael J. Sullivan originally planned to end the series on. This was supposed to be the last one. He decided to go for 3 more books, and I'm glad he did because it gave us a lot more answers than questions, which I was super grateful for. This one in particular is kind of the climax of the series, in my opinion. You see all these heroes that shouldn't be heroes. You have the girl who has a lot of PTSD and can't really cope and doesn't really speak. You have the chieftain's wife. You have the girl who's a little bit too free-spirited and free-minded for the people of that time. You have the cripple potterer. You have just people you wouldn't expect being the heroes banding together and creating huge untold waves that are going to transverse throughout the fictional history of this world, and you're going to see their effects all the way down the line, even into Michael J. Sullivan's series, The Ryaria Chronicles and Revelations, which is hundreds and thousands of years later after this one. It was just a really monumental one because you saw a lot of heart and emotion, and I really respect Michael J. Sullivan in this one for not doing the standard. You know, of course, the hero's going to survive at the end. The hero's going to be saved at the end. Oh, he's going to defeat the bad guy at the end. All those standard tropes we've grown to expect, Michael J. Sullivan throws them out the window, and there's real loss and there's real heart in this one. And it's part of the reason I love it, and I think it's the reason why it's one of Michael J. Sullivan's best books. Next, another no surprise pick is going to be The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn series, the first era. And it basically just follows a little girl named Vin, who is basically homeless and poor on the streets, as she's recruited into basically a group of ragtag revolutionaries. And they're going to take down the final emperor. They're going to take down the emperor and restore freedom to their people. And I really love this one because, first of all, the magic system in this world is probably one of the best ones I've read. For those who have not read Mistborn yet, you have to read it, but I'll just tell you, they basically consume metal. And certain people have an ability to just use one metal. Certain people have the ability to use all the metals, and majority of the population can't use any metals. Our main character, Vin, is a Mistborn, meaning that she's able to use all the metals. So she can consume and do insanely inhuman feats. And it's just such a fun story because there's not just your standard, typical, bad, evil emperor overthrown. There's a lot of history and there's a lot of a lot of heavy-duty choices that were interwoven within the history of the story, and that leads to a lot of great characters, which I really do enjoy. There's also a lot of motifs that reflect back to biblical times, which I always enjoy finding those and seeing them within stories just because they're kind of fun, being like, oh, I know where that came from. My particular reason I love this one so much is that it's not just so actiony. It has tension-filled moments, it has moments of emotion, it has moments of vulnerability, it has moments of intense action scenes that we all love, and it just has everything. And it's very rare that an author is able to pull all those different strands back together into one piece, and that is why it is going to be on my top 10 list. The next one is a book in the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Cogman. This one is The Lost Plot. It's one of the later ones in the series of 8 books, This one revolves around our two main characters, Irene and Kai, as usual. And for those who do not know, Irene and Kai are agents of the library being this mystical force slash location that kind of exists between worlds. And this library has all the books that will ever be written. Irene and Kai's job is to go out there to different alternate timelines and collect books and bring them back that are unique to those timelines. So they might go and find a Great Gatsby in our timeline, but in another timeline, the Great Gatsby was never written, and another book of similar fame was written, and they'll go and collect that one as well. And they bring them all together to this mystical library. In this one, Irene and Kai have to go to 1920s America, Prohibition era, when alcohol was not involved. I've talked about this book rather recently on my channel, but I just love that era so much. It's a really fun one with the dancing and the gangsters and the gangs. It's a really fun book. I love the atmosphere of it. I love the smoking the pipe in the underground secret illegal bar. Like it paints a lot of really nice pictures in my mind, and I really enjoy that era. And I'm so glad to see one of my urban fantasy authors go to that era and have our characters be involved in it. And that's part of the reason I love this series in general, is because you're able to visit so many different types of worlds. This one just happens to be the book that takes place in my favorite time period for American history. So there we go. The Lost Plot. This one is going to be The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix. This is a book I read actually this year. Probably one of my favorite urban fantasy standalones of all time. Why? Because it's just fresh. There's a lot of freshness in this book, and I also just love the premise. Basically, we follow a girl. Her name is Susan. She's living in an alternate London in the mid-1980s. She's never known her father. She's never known who he was, what he did, or anything like that. And so when she turns 18, she decides, I'm going to go to London and find my father, which is what she does. And upon appearing in London, she ends up falling into this world of supernatural mysteries and mystique and crazy forces that are moving all around in her quest to find her father. The reason I love this book so much is because I love what the book is named after, The Left-Handed Booksellers of London. Basically, it's about this group family who basically are like the police force of the supernatural community, and they're just this extended family who all work out of a bookstore, and they are left-handed or right-handed booksellers. Left-handed ones being more of the attacking, action-y type people, and the right-handed being the more mystic and like prophecy type people. And they're just a group of magical users that operate a bookstore, but at the same time they're also protecting the supernatural community. And I, until reading this book, never realized that was like my dream job. And now I know what my dream job is. And there you go. That's why I love this book. It's career ambitions. And then of course, my number one pick, a book that I'm sure is on pretty much everyone and their mother's top 10, is going to be The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I've never cried so hard during a book. Oh my god. Whenever I lend this book out to anybody, I don't lend this one. I lend my lending copy, I assure you. But whenever I lend this book out, I'm always like within the first 100 pages, I'm like, have you cried yet? Because it's so emotional. And they're like, and I'm like, you should cry soon. Don't worry. You'll know what I'm talking about when you get there. I love this book. It's just following Kavoth's story in such a way that's so real, and it's painted in such a way that you literally can touch Kavoth's life. Like you're reading an autobiography. Like I feel like I'm literally reading an autobiography. And then I'm reminded, no, this is like a magical, unreal, surreal world that doesn't exist. But it's just so real. And how Patrick Rothfuss writes a story makes the world seem tangible to a point that you can't really get in any other series. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's the detail. I don't know if it's just Rothfuss's beautiful writing, which he probably one of the most beautiful writers I have read to date. I don't know what it is exactly, but just that feeling is why it is going to be on this list. And I don't think I need to tell you guys what it's about, because this is probably one of the most... This will go down as a classic, I'm sure you. Our kids and our grandkids will be reading this book in high school and groaning about how they have to read that stupid classical Name of the Wind book. Now, only if we can get Doors of Stone. But that's another day in another video. And that is pretty much my top 10 list, guys. But I do have 3 honorable mentions, just because I didn't really feel like this individual book deserved to be on the list. But these are books that are really important to me, and ones that often find themselves on the list during different time periods. Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This is the one that opened my eyes to the lit RPG genre. For those who do not know, I make a lot of lit RPG videos, which is basically literature role-playing games. It is books that take place with gaming mechanics most typically. And this is the one that opened my eyes to that genre, and that is why I'm forever grateful to this book. Also, it's just a wild ride. Then, of course, we have Terry Brooks' The Dark Legacy of Shannara Wards of Fairy, but this one is in the middle of the series. But weirdly enough, when I was asking for fantasy recommendations years ago, a bookseller gave me this. And I had no clue what I was getting myself into. I didn't know that I was about to find myself involved in a world that is dozens of books long, and I love this series so much. And I particularly love this one, not because this one is superior to any of the other series within the Shannara world, but because this is the one that introduced me to the Shannaraverse, and I'm forever grateful because Shannara opened my eyes to epic fantasy. And I just have to mention this book and give it credit for where credit is due. And then last but not least is probably the book that started our journey on YouTube and also just reading in general. But that is, of course, going to be Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling, which is, of course, once again, no surprise to anybody. And I don't really need to define why, because you guys have already watched 1.5 million videos about why Harry Potter is one of the greatest series of all time and has changed a generation for the better, in my personal opinion. That is pretty much all I have for you guys today. That's my list. Thank you guys so much for getting to 300. Please do comment down below what are your guys' thoughts on my top 10 list. Are there any books that surprised you? What books would you guys have on here instead? Are there any books on here that you guys absolutely hated? I'm super curious to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. I read them all, and I look forward to reading them. So with that, please don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Bye now.